welcome back to our Thursday evenings. So we are still kind of going over the Vimalakirti Sutra. We're in chapter 5, we're getting close to the end. But there's an article in Tricycle magazine that I gave you. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So it actually comes at a really good time in our coverage of the sutra. So I'll maybe talk a little bit about that. So it's not that often that we get popular literature or magazine articles dealing with Shingon or Japanese esoteric Buddhism, but we get one in this case. So I printed out the full article if anybody's interested. It's still available online, and then the handout is just a page and a half of sort of the tidbits, the good parts. Not that they're not all good, but maybe pieces that fit with the where we are in the Vimalakirti. So in the sutra, Vimalakirti is discussing with Manjushri sort of what this illness of the Bodhisattva is, and Vimalakirti responds sort of famously that the illness of the Bodhisattva is the illness of sentient beings, that their compassion of the Bodhisattva is such that they not only sort of take on the hardships of people, but also I think it implies that compassion in this sense isn't something that you do from a distance, right? It's something that you're really working in. You're much like the imagery of the lotus, right? Your roots are in the mud right along with all the other plants, not that you're somehow aloof from it and looking down with pity. Oh, the poor sentient beings, look at them suffering, right? So in this way, Vimalakirti is illustrating it very vividly with his own illness, right? What is the source of your illness? Manjushri asks, it's the illness of all sentient beings. So that raises a couple questions. If you start to think about Buddhist ideas in general, and you say, okay, if this is a high-level bodhisattva and he truly has come back with a body to help people, is he then still subject to the same suffering and experiences that people are? So how can you really say he has transcended the problems that everyday normal people have? So that's sort of the next portion of the discussion. So I sometimes say that this is one of those areas where Buddhist teaching, if you're reading it slowly and kind of thinking with the teaching, you may jump to that question like, oh, but I wonder this. And then pretty soon it says, well, if you're wondering that, we're going to talk about it now. So there's a lot of expectation that's happening, I think, in the text. So there's this term that's translated here, objectified mentation. So where does the illness arise from? And the response is objectified mentation. So I'm going to call this translator language. We never talk like this. This is probably a good way to translate the ideas, but in English, if you're only reading the English, maybe not so helpful to say objectified mentation. When's the last time you used mentation in a sentence? Probably not, and you probably aren't using objectified in the same manner that they're talking about here. So it's really talking about seeing things from a dualistic, objectified manner, right? Seeing objects in a this or that, this opposed to that type of manner. And it's how you learn language. So the problem here is literally how we have learned to communicate. So you learn, especially if you learn a foreign language or if you've taken any kind of foreign language lessons, pretty soon, within the first semester, you're going to get into, this versus that, that one over there versus this one over here. So every language has its own way of distinguishing this. Are, kore, right, in Japanese, right, or in English, you're going to have this separation. which I found out is very helpful, because as soon as you finish your first year of a language and maybe you get to do overseas studies and you're wanting to buy something and the clerk is like, which one? You're like, that one. Which one? No, that one. Which one? That one. Oh, how do I say it? So it's very useful for basic shopping. But that very fundamental way of thinking is what Vimalakirti says getting in the way of our understanding. So we may say, okay, well, I'll just give up now then. Everything I know is an obstacle for me. But of course, this is question, Manjushri's question: what is objectified mentation? It is the triple world, right? It is the world that we see, the past, present, and future. The way we see things is this objectified thinking. It's apparent in the way we see reality. It's apparent in everything that we see around us. And in many ways, this is very striking and direct language. It's saying, what's wrong with the way I think? And Vimalakirti is saying the way you think is completely bound up in the way you think you see the world. Right? So you start to think that, it's I'm over here and you are over there, and the plant is over there by the window. That these are actual truths of things, rather than all of us here together. Right? We don't often think in that manner. You don't go and say, all of those apples there in the basket, please give me, the one in the midst of all of his friends. We don't talk this way. So consequently, we often don't think that way, and we draw very quickly distinctions between people. So we want to label them. I came up this week with someone, discussing a topic and providing completely unnecessary, details about the story. Very detailed descriptions of the person that were completely besides the point that they were trying to make. But they couldn't distinguish all of the things that, in their mind, that they saw that separated that person from the other people in the story, from the actual story. It's completely irrelevant. Well, let me tell you all about the person. They had long hair and this and this and this. Completely irrelevant to their medical condition or something like that. Just totally separate. But again, the splitting hairs, sometimes we just can't help it. We see these differences, and rather than focusing on what we share. So this whole section is really focusing on what we share, and that's our troubles, the hurdles that we have before us. So in this discussion, you're not going to see the tall disciple listening to this, his neck hurt because he was straining to listen, or the short disciple could hear but he couldn't see over the other students' backs and the other monks were in the way. They're not making distinctions between the students and the teachers. The only distinction is what people need from the teaching for them to kind of break out of their very rigid way of thinking. So those are the distinctions that you see in the sutras, not the rich and poor, and those are far less important. If they're there, it's because it's a mental block for somebody, not because of that has anything to do with your ability, which of course makes Buddhism, made it and continues to make it radical, right? Very radical, right? You're male, female, doesn't matter. Young, old, doesn't matter. Rich, poor, doesn't matter. What have you done in the past? Doesn't matter, right? All of these things are not, fundamental obstacles, right? They may present you with unique challenges, but they're not fundamental obstacles to you exploring the path. Which, of course, in a country with a rigid caste system, is very radical, right? So this still continues to be a very radical teaching. Right? I get a lot of those questions often. People want to know, well, what can't I do? What can't I be? What background can I not be from? Where's the limit? And they're often sort of puzzled when I say there isn't one. Right? So, but we're so used to that. Right? So the next question: what is it to eliminate objectified mentation? It is done with non-attainment. So another one of these puzzling things. So you want to get rid of this thinking. How do you do it? You do it with non-attainment. But if I want to attain something, how do I not attain it, and then you get very confused and you think, oh, I'll go watch TV for a while, put this book down. So how do we eliminate, move beyond this way of thinking? How do we change it? And Vimalakirti says you can't do it by striving for it, grasping for it. Right? So it's not necessarily that if you do 500 prostrations and 300 hours of meditation that you will get it. Right? That's a very, especially I think in the West, we think, how many hours do I have to apply myself to this? How many of these things do I have to do? We think it can be just simply written out. So I think in many ways it's also very helpful for our way of viewing things. I often, think back like, when did I used to see this? This was very prevalent in the 80s. If you wanted to study karate, you go to the dojo and they say, okay, if you attend this many lessons and then you will achieve your black belt in this period of time, because that was a big thing. Everybody, how soon can I get my black belt? And it was a formula at many schools, which always struck me as strange. Like, well, what if you just come and you don't put any effort in? It's just kind of a guaranteed. If you have a warm body in this room, then you'll get this. Very odd to me. So he says you can't get at it here through brute force. So Vimalakirti says, if there is no attainment, there is no objectified mentation. What is non-attainment? It is the transcendence of dualistic views. So you can't, bash your fists against the door and get it. Right? If I break down this door, there are liberations on the other side. It's not that brute force manner. It has to be transcended. Right? So why do we sit in silent meditation? We're observing our mind. We're seeing what's going on. And the idea is that over time you're going to start to see changes, but you don't smash all of these obstacles. You just start to see that they're no longer so important. You start to observe that these separations that we used to make, we don't make anymore, and we no longer are like reaching out to grasp for them. We're still okay, right? Because there's a little bit of fear when you start spiritual practice. You start to see things differently. And then we may ask ourselves these existential questions. Am I still me? What does it mean? I used to do all these things. I don't do those things anymore. What does that mean for my true self? You may look back through some old journal or diary and I don't recognize myself anymore. What does that mean for me now? You may meet with old friends and they say, well, you're not fun anymore. You don't do all the stuff you used to do, right? When's the last time you had a drunken night? You're like, oh, I haven't done that because why? And then you're like, oh, is it okay that I don't do that? So we have these thoughts. So I guess I'll use another martial arts example. Compare this to Tai Chi. So Tai Chi is internal martial art versus external martial art. Meaning what? So sometimes actually in books from China, they just refer to this as calisthenics, right? They don't even refer to it as a martial art. Yeah, right? It's just exercise. But there's a couple different types of exercises, right? Even back in the 70s, this was popular with, just body weight exercise or resistance, isometrics. So people think if I, move very vigorously and build the physical skeletal muscle, then that's going to make me healthy. And then we find that a lot of people do that and they're actually very unhealthy still. And then somehow this exercise, which seems slow, maybe you're not huffing and puffing at the end, maybe you don't have rippling, bulging muscles, people are living longer. So it should tell us something about what the body actually needs if your goal is longevity and health versus just going to the absolute peak performance of what the human body physically can do. So I think meditation is more like an internal exercise. Spiritual work is more internal. But a lot of times in the West, we approach it like it's external, right? We're going to CrossFit our meditation. We're going to marathon train our meditation. And in many ways, I think maybe we don't know how. We don't have another model for doing things. It's this, throw yourself in, get sweaty and dirty with it, and then see some big change in a short period, but those you don't necessarily see the same type of change, right? So obviously both are healthy. They're going to make you healthy. They're just going to make you healthy in different ways, and they're working on different places, right? And both require work, but the perspective is a little different. Maybe the method is different. And so Vimalakirti continues with his definition of what kind of non-attainment. So he says, what are dualistic views? They are the internalistic view and the externalistic view. These are without attainment. Manjushri, this is how bodhisattvas who are ill control their minds. This is how they eliminate old age, illness, death, and suffering. This is the bodhisattva's bodhi, their wisdom. If it were not like this, then my cultivation would be a foolish waste. If it is like one who is victorious over his enemies, being called a hero. This is the term for the bodhisattva who has simultaneously eliminated old age, illness, and death. Bodhisattvas who are ill should think as follows. If this illness of mine is neither real nor non-existent, then the illness of sentient beings are also neither real nor non-existent. So you're using your own experience to meditate and contemplate the experience of others, and you're transcending, right, these issues, not beating them up and winning, right? You're not in this way sort of conquering over them. If you no longer see it as an obstacle, it's not an obstacle, right? There's recently, so obviously there's a lot of political news in our country, but one of a candidate was being interviewed, and the person said, it seems that you came out with very publicly with a lot of details of your life. And they said, yes, if I didn't do that, somebody else would bring up those things in my past and characterize them differently. So I'm going to bring it out. Right? So basically, I'm going to have power over it. I'm going to introduce it. I'm going to say, yes, I did these things, or this is who I am, and I'm not afraid of that, rather than someone say, well, they must be afraid of it. So in many ways, I think you can see this kind of the same way, that and sometimes this is why maybe Buddhism seems depressing to people, because it's straight talk, it's honest. It says, eventually the body doesn't function, so that's okay. And so if we recognize that and we don't think of it as a fearful thing, then we take the power away from it. So we transcend it, rather than, okay, somehow I'm going to do all these surgeries and look 19 even when I'm 90. That's okay. And in the same way, if I don't get caught up in the rat race, right? If I know that I have enough and I'm content with enough, then I don't suffer as much, because I'm not constantly striving to get more. So I think a lot of these ideas are ingrained. Buddhism had a really strong effect on Japanese culture. So a lot of these things are ingrained, and the basic ideas, probably from the Japanese side, they don't think of them as Buddhist, but concept of not being wasteful, mottainai. It's this idea that comes from the monastery, but it's so deeply ingrained in day-to-day thinking to not just throw things away, not waste the thing, get it fixed. We see fewer and fewer repair shops here, and more repair shops if you go to Asia by comparison, right? There's still, how hard it is to find a shoe shop these days? You want shoes repaired? When's the last time you saw a clock shop, right? Not really. So just a very different, viewpoint. So if we're caught too much in the, we have to get the latest and greatest, the newest one, somehow because there's a new one, the old one isn't as good, which is completely just a marketing technique, then we have this illness of sentient beings. So this is the transcending it. So that's not a state of mind that we can exercise vigorously to get, where we have to relax. Right? You have to relax, look at it, and say, yeah, the version 2 that I have still works. So I don't necessarily need version 8 just because it's out. Now maybe version 2 is irreparable or breaks, and okay, I'll buy version 8. but because I need it, not because someone tells me I have to have it. So I think we see a lot of this in our day-to-day. So here's the big quotation. When performing this contemplation, such bodhisattvas may generate an affectionate view of great compassion with regard to sentient beings, but this should be forsaken. Why? So there's a difference between identifying and having compassion and getting so caught up in the day-to-day suffering and needs of people that you actually can't help them. So there has to be an awareness of maybe the grounds of your own practice in order to adequately help somebody. Which, if you think about it, let's think about it from, our day-to-day social system. The police officer probably shouldn't be the one to go out and arrest his brother. He's not going to do a good job. He can't be objective. The doctor shouldn't be doing surgery on their own child, right? They won't be objective. The judge shouldn't be, listening to the case of, their own fellow judges, necessarily. So you need some form of either practice perspective or objective distance, right? So there's a danger. So they warn us. So bodhisattvas eliminate the vexations of sensory data and generate great compassion. If they have an affectionate view of compassion, they would thereby generate aversion towards samsara. If they are able to transcend this, they will not have any aversion. And no matter where they are subsequently reborn, they will not be limited by any affectionate view. They will be born without bonds and be able to explain the Dharma to sentient beings and emancipate them from their bonds. So the bodhisattvas no longer so focused on their own needs, desires, wants, discomforts. Conversely, are completely focused on the needs and how to help others, how to help them transcend, focusing on placing their energy and focus on others. Then they're going to be more appropriately situated to help people. So this is key, because what you don't hear the Buddha say is, I'm too tired to help you right now, or these kind of things. So it's also helpful for us to give perspective on when we're ready to help others. So do we have that level of capacity? Are we too focused on our own needs and wants, or do we have, what percentage of our energy do we have available to others? What percent do we actually have available to think about our own mind and our own needs? So this is something to really look at and focus on. And it says here, kind of an interesting foreshadowing of things to come. Bodhisattvas eliminate the vexations of sensory data and generate great compassion. If they have an affectionate view of compassion, they would thereby generate aversion towards samsara. So if you want, if you have this affectionate view of compassion, meaning if you think of it in very sentimental terms, like, oh my gosh, the people are suffering, and then the next step is this world, the problem is this world, the problem, and we see this a lot in religious discourse. If there is insert deity, why do children suffer? If there are these miracles, then why do disasters happen, right? Because you have this sort of more emotional response, then the next response is the generation of anger, is a generation of aversion. So here saying you can see the suffering and needs of sentient beings, but you don't have that next step of generating anger towards the situation. And that's that's hard yet.
Yeah, so how, from a practice perspective, how do you distinguish that sentimental feeling of compassion, that sentimental feeling of concern and care for others, which is to certainly good, makes you human? How do you distinguish that leads towards an unskillful form of that versus that which is very cheap?
So that, of course, goes through to the end of this chapter.
Okay.
But partially, and I think you see it from chapter 4, you have very high level practitioners who think, oh, I've got it. And Vimalakirti can still say, but not quite, not exactly, or you need to turn. So partially this is it's a lifelong practice perspective that we always have to be careful. We always have to analyze, what our work is doing and have to be, very rigorously honest with ourselves of what do we want, and is it for our own needs, our own sensory needs, as it says, right? They eliminate vexations of sensory data. That do we want to be comfortable? Is it to help us, or is it truly to help someone else? So when we get to the point where we recognize that we are okay with whatever we have, right? If we have less food today, that's fine. If we have more food tomorrow, that's fine too, right? If we find that we're not being pulled between these extremes of, I want my needs met, and we're focused on our needs, then we're getting closer to that, being very objective, right? So think of it this way. We have a lot of, sadly, a lot of scandals in the news, big institutions, right?
Yeah.
And all of those scandals are somebody trying to make their needs met, their sensory needs met, and it's so their craving, desire to have their sensory need met outweighs everything that they're supposed to do, right? Whether it be a university level, church, political level, something. So when we find that we aren't doing something to just get our needs met, then we're getting closer to that, right? So that's where it's helping us, because a lot of these things really it's just a cover for people getting their needs met.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's unfortunate because it's at the expense of someone else.
So then, if I'm going to interpret that right, the distinguishment from a simple perspective, how I could think of practicing that is that sentimental need towards another, so I feel good,
Right.
versus the genuine concern of the other first.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
If I guess I'll say in kind of this way, if you do something and you have to instantly post about it on social media, maybe you have the wrong motivation. Now, if the post on social media is to encourage other people to do the same, well, that's different, right? If the post is social media is to get other people involved so that they want to help, they can. That's different. But if it's just look what I did, and soliciting that additional applause, then maybe not the right motivation.
I guess I'm hearing also a vein in there of caution. I think maybe I've heard you say it, the caution of people who throw themselves away too much too, in the sense
Yes.
of giving towards a cause and then doing so much that they're not really helping themselves, not really helping anyone else either,
Mm-hmm.
or they become so concerned about the plight of the poor that they collapse into their own suffering.
Yes.
Of witnessing that,
Mm-hmm.
or so concerned over the plight of something. And so there's a warning there too about that not being, that's not skillful,
It's not, and that's unfortunately that's where our society sometimes applauds that type of martyrdom, right?
Yeah.
So we don't have that concept in Buddhism. It's not a skillful concept, because it's not it's a strings attached giving.
Yeah.
And that's why this is hard, because it's a no strings attached giving. But it also requires, that, because it's not martyrdom, it means that if you're not ready, then don't do it. Right? Don't get involved with it because you're not ready. That's okay. So a lot of people have trouble with that. They're like, but I want to give. But if it goes back to the chapter 4, Vimalakirti goes to the one student who had saved up for 2 years, and then he's going to do this huge giveaway to all the people. And he said, well, if you give away the teaching, right, that's better than giving away the money. So that's a better thing to do, because that lasts longer. And if people are going to spend money, then people aren't necessarily going to get the same gift or the same benefit equally. So there's all these other issues come to mind. But if you give the teaching, it's timeless. Maybe the person comes back 5 years later and says, I've really been thinking about this, and now I have that moment of breakthrough. But that's really it's a more benefit. But it took me a while. I read this, I was thinking, well, why would you have an affectionate view of compassion and they would thereby generate aversion towards samsara? Thinking, would they have more like connection with samsara? And I was like, oh no, it's that age old, you look up in the sky, how can you let this happen?
Right.
That kind of
You
thing.
detest the suffering of the world.
Right. And then you detest the world. And then eventually you just become aloof from it all.
Right.
So
Bitter.
yeah, people can be bitter. So this is the potential hurdle. And it's very easy. And in fact, if you do it, everyone will be like, oh, I understand. Wow, they're so compassionate. Their heart is so big. Right? You're going to get a lot of, pats on the back about it. When in fact, here, Vimalakirti is saying that's not the way. So it's good, if you think about the audience, right? All these people gather around to listen to these two bodhisattvas talk. What's their practice like? And go, oh, I've never really thought of it from that perspective. Because we probably all had that moment. I had that moment once. I was in a foreign country and I was walking through a market and there was a police crackdown because nobody had a license to sell. And all these vans opened up and police jumped out with billy clubs and they just started beating the vendors. And strangely, I started running too because you get caught up in the running. And then I was like, wait, I'm not one of the people they're looking for. But then you watch this happen and you think, people just want to make a little extra money to feed their family. And it's not the United States, so there's no just arrest and take away. I mean, they just decide they're going to beat everyone, and it's a difficult scene to watch. And I had that moment, like, why is this happening? Right? You look up in the sky, like, what kind of world do we live in? And so that undermines your compassion, because some people just give up, or you'll hear a lot of people, even in Buddhist tradition, say, well, I got to this point, so I assumed this or that practice was useless, so I stopped practice at all. Right? So it's not that. It's just, it's our, we found a sticking point in our mind. So that's the part we have to work on, not give up. Which brings us to the article. So this article came out this month, I think, in Tricycle. So the subjugation of evil. So it has a nice catchy title. Everybody would want to know why in Buddhism we have an article that would be titled something like this. So the full article's there if anybody is interested, and then I just printed out a couple specifics here. So the first paragraph in the excerpt, so esoteric Buddhist subjugation rituals are best understood as upaya, expedient means that can, through the subduing of internal and external obstructions, guide the practitioner to awakening. Essential to this, however, is a clear and sustained contemplation of bodhicitta, compassion, the practitioner's aspiration to attain enlightenment in order to save all sentient beings from the suffering of samsara. The cultivation of bodhicitta complements ritual of subjugation and is to be practiced simultaneously with them. The goal is realization of the Mahayana idea of the equality of all minds, that is, that all things, including oneself, are fundamentally of the same nature as the Buddha. Rituals that were performed for the subjugation of forceful conversion of political enemies, criminal enterprises such as piracy, and vengeful spirits also operated under this framework, in that these rituals were not performed simply for the sake of conquest, meaning it wasn't just to get the outward physical material goal. Rather, they were seen as falling under the Buddhist idea of actualizing peace, both internally in the mind of the practitioner and externally in the social political realm, to support the awakening of oneself along with the awakening of all beings. So aspirationally, the prayers are kind of directed towards both ideally stopping the negative behavior on the outside, but also seeing that those people transform. So inside yourself, now the outside negative force or action or group, you see them transforming, which means you're extending compassion to them rather than anger, right? So let's say Portland has a rally of people who are spouting non-friendly beliefs, and instead of going and being across the street and yelling back other non-friendly things, you get together on the other side of the town and you do a puja or ritual, and you see them transformed, right? You see the people changing their minds, you see them dropping symbols of hatred and anger and violence, and that they suddenly turn, right? And they embrace compassion and wisdom. So what does that do to you? Well, to you, then you no longer see them as a threat, right? You're not generating anger and like, we've got to confront this, right? You start to change yourself, but then also maybe if you meet them on the bus later that day as everyone's going home, you approach them differently. And then if you can approach them differently, maybe they see you differently because they're expecting to be confronted one way and they're suddenly confronted a different way, right? They don't see this person as the enemy. So what's interesting about that, on a one-to-one basis, if you get somebody who's got a very strongly held belief and you say, well, I don't like X group of people or X type of person or people from that place, and you get them in a room together, they usually soften their message because very quickly they're like, oh, they've got a family and kids just like I do, and oh, you work there? I used to work there. Okay. So it's that separation that makes it easy. It's, requiring us to get together. Now, this is a great example. If someone's demonstrating and advocating your annihilation, it may not be skillful to go down and confront them in the midst of their anger. That may not be the smartest way to handle it. So then if you want to do something about it, what do? So you can actually bring it into your practice. So this is where the subjugation. Now, obviously the language that's used, the imagery of Fudo in the article, doesn't immediately, if you're not familiar with him, look friendly, right? So there's always this danger, I won't say danger, potential pitfall in this practice where there's a misunderstanding. People misread the language. So that's why the recommendation is always like someone should guide you into it, not that you just pick it up and do it. So this has been translated as secret, not secret, just not immediately evident. That's all. Right? So, but these were done. So I didn't. There's a couple things in the article that aren't quite. I wouldn't have written it that way, but they, the rituals like this are done for political issues, just regular day-to-day issues, individual issues. People come, and I think a lot of it does start to change, how people see each other, because ultimately that's going to be the linchpin factor. So if we scroll down a little bit more, and in the excerpt I gave you, the next subjugation has long been held as a hallmark feature of esoteric Buddhism, but it does not stand by itself. Rather, it was incumbent on practitioners of these rituals to clarify the ways in which subjugation related to the fundamental Buddhist issues of awakening and compassion. So you're not necessarily going to find a ritual for everything. You have to do some thinking about how to apply the ideas to the situation you're working on so that you can actually transform yourself. So you have to find, either the anger in yourself or maybe the person you're doing the prayers on behalf of, and recognize that rather than just say, well, that person's totally justified because look what happened to them, right? Again, adding the sentimentality to samsara, where you have to actually be more objective, which requires you to already do some practice to have that ability, right? To bring some wisdom to the situation and then try to transform, some very difficult emotions. Because some of them can be very difficult, right? We've got news today of, more, especially crimes against children and things like that, and that can be very, very upsetting. So what do you do with that? How do you transform that? And, being angry about it isn't good, but I can hear even in seasoned news reporters having difficulty just reporting it, without being angry. So that can be difficult. So in the esoteric Buddhist tradition, the functioning of the subjugation of evil is personified by the wrathful figures in the pantheon called Myo, or Sanskrit Vijayaraja, Wisdom King. So I should say here, subjugation of evil, maybe a better way to say this would be subjugation of obstacles. Evil being anything that's in the way of your practice, not or maybe social, cultural ideas of what evil might be. The Myo are manifestations of the cosmic Buddhas or Bodhisattvas and are endowed with the ability to subdue and eliminate obstructions, whether internal or external, in order to bring beings to awakening and to recover and maintain harmony in the social realm. Like mantras, subjugation rituals invoke Myo figures, function as skillful means to dispel the darkness of ignorance. Among the various forms of Myo figure, Fudo Myo, immovable Wisdom King, has long been the central of central importance. The commentary on the Mahabharata Sutra, composed by the Chinese master Yi Xing, so this goes back to our Chinese roots of Shingon, one of the most influential treatises on the development of Japanese esoteric Buddhism. The treatise gives particular emphasis to Fudo, the wrathful manifestation of the cosmic Buddha Mahavajrayana, the primordial Buddha in the esoteric tradition of East Asia. Fudo is said to be the personification of the power of mantra to subjugate rebellious beings. In this case, us. We are rebellious because we rebel against our true nature. Fudo is also the main figure invoked in the fire ritual, or Goma, the core element of Shingon, which is performed to destroy negative energies and bring benefit to individuals, the realm, and all sentient beings. The Goma is frequently practiced at Buddhist temples to this day. Really? It seems very odd to read about something that I do on a regular basis in a scholarly article. Yes, we do this very often. So they included a nice photo of Fudo there, but this is, I think, a good, I'm happy to see in a popular, walk into your local bookstore, pick up, read an article about, these ideas, because there's a lot of incorrect ideas on the internet about what Fudo's role is. So I would say primarily here, even the external obstacles are internal obstacles in other people. They're just external to yourself. But they're all ultimately internal obstacles. So it goes on. So the purpose of the practices associated with Fudo is to enable practitioners to protect and preserve bodhicitta by cutting away the practitioner's various internal vexations. I think this is probably the most important part to remember. Why are we practicing this? Sometimes people get the wrong idea about what the practice is about. But the subjugation ultimately here is about getting rid of, with a surgeon's scalpel, getting rid of anger and, frustration and jealousy. And, it came up today when, I was about to say something and someone said it more eloquently than I was and beat me to it, and I felt small, and get rid of that feeling. Because all those things are obscuring, like our forest fire smoke outside, the beautiful view of our mountain, or the beautiful view of our bodhicitta. These things get in the way, and they build up real small, and then you don't recognize that suddenly there's a problem. So through the practice of the three secret activities of the body, forming mudras, speech, recitation of mantras, and mind, contemplation of Fudo, one is able to attain union with him and thus remove obstacles and achieve immediate enlightenment. With some practice. So I Ching's commentary further explains that a practitioner should, through the employment of mantras and mudras, contemplate oneself as none other than Fudo, enacting subjugation wrathfully by stepping down on the head of the source of the obstruction, in this case, the head of your frustration, not your boss who's frustrating you, to be clear. By embodying Fudo, one can, through active engagement, dispel all obstructions. At the same time, however, the commentary teaches that these obstacles are caused by one's own mind, and specifically, that is, mental afflictions of stinginess and greed, accumulated over infinite previous lifetimes, that are the root cause of the arising of obstructions. So why does that person bother you? Why do we label them as the issue? It's our own internal vexations. So I got to practice this today. I was downtown, going to the bookstore, and I found a very nice parking space near Powell's, our palatial palace of Temple of Books, and there was someone waiting. I think they thought I was going to pull out, but I was parking, and so I parked, and then they rolled down the window to yell at me that I was taking up 2 parking spaces, and could I move my car, and did I know what I was doing? And I said, well, actually, if you look in front, there's a yellow strip, so that's a no parking zone, so it only looks like 2 spaces, but it's just 1. But I said it very nicely and politely, and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, right? But I'm sure the knee-jerk reaction should be, you don't know what you're talking about, and then they peel off and almost hit a pedestrian or something like that. But it's just very calmly, they're like, oh, okay, that makes total sense, right? So you could see this anger just go away, right, immediately. So we can practice it all the time, right? In any situation, it's not just here. We recognize that person's frustration has nothing to do with us, and nor do we need to get connected to it and let it bother us either. So by stepping on our own mental afflictions, then we can transform, right, the pesky people on the outside. So it's a very useful practice. But if there's nothing to latch onto internally, then the insult, the anger, the whatever outside just doesn't have any place to perch. So it goes on here. You can read. These are just the highlighted parts I thought were really good. But if anybody wants to take the full article, feel free. It's still online. I don't know if they leave all of those articles online long term. So
they might eventually go behind a paywall.
Yeah, I think so.
They're all there, but
Yeah.
eventually they don't. Yeah. But I'm not, I don't remember.
So there's 3. Who is the article on Kukai that came out about 3 months ago?
Mm-hmm.
This is the 3rd, and apparently there's one in the middle I missed, so I'll have to go back and look, take a look. But it was nice to have, again, in a readily available kind of popular publication, 3 articles on Shingon, Japanese esoteric Buddhism, because it's most of the magazines, it's Tibetan and Zen, and most of the other, to be fair, Chinese traditions, Taiwanese temples. There tend to be a few favorites that get a lot of play, so it's nice to see, even though this is fairly scholarly, it's still accessible because it's a decent length that hopefully readers won't get bored before they get to the end. So any questions?
I guess, academic question, has this commentary from Yixing been translated into English?
I don't think so, not in its entirety.
Okay. I don't think it would be either, but...
There are pieces in the Weaving of Mantra, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Professor Abe's work. And in one of the translations of the Mahavajrayana Sutra, the first chapter of the commentary is translated, I believe, but not the entire thing. We do have some resources for it, though.
Do the chapters of commentary match the chapter of the Mahavajrayana?
I believe so. Roughly, yeah. It's a commentary.
Usually how that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm. It's been a while since I compared it in that way, but yeah, it's pretty much fully commented.
Sure. Okay. Well, otherwise that sutra's impossible.
Yes. And for the record, the Mahavajrayana Sutra is not the type of sutra you just sit down and read. The first chapter is readable. The other chapters require initiation, and they expect that you're doing the ritual practice because they are about the rituals. So having not been initiated into the individual rituals, it doesn't connect to anything. So a lot of people want to read it because they'll read on Wikipedia, well, okay, that's the primary sutra of Shingon, so I need to read that to understand Shingon. That's not exactly an accurate way of looking at that text. You can read the first chapter and get some ideas, but it's definitely a sutra that you read over and over time with your practice, your understanding of it matures. So it's not like the Vimalakirti where it's a question answer type, let me lay out all the teaching. It lays out some of those ideas, but later on it just talks about aspects. It's very coded language. If you know the rituals, then you can go back and read it and say, of course, this is what it's discussing. This is where that ritual comes from. This is how it fits here. This is how it fits to the meditation. Without that, it's not so useful. Even though we have 2 translations now, 3 translations in English.
Right.
So, and of course, I've said that to people so they read it because they think, oh, you must be trying to keep something secret. And no, go ahead.
Don't do any good.
Flip through. It's fine, but it's better to have a good grounding in the core Mahayana sutras, the major sutras that all the schools are discussing. Then everything makes more sense, because even the Mahavajrayana sutras presupposing that you understand Buddhism. That's not where you should go to try to learn Buddhism. Dedicate merit. So whether it's issues that I mentioned, our world, something closer to us, something that we need, or even just our air quality and the health and safety of all our friends dwelling in the forests, we can dedicate merit to them.